I am back. I am Whitney Galubinski-Vogel. I'm a teacher, fifth-year teacher here in Gainesville ISD.
I'm Natalie Dollar. I'm new for this round. I'm also a teacher here in Gainesville at the high school. It's my third year teaching. I'm from Gainesville originally, and I left and saw the world and worked at a travel company in the Netherlands, and then decided, you know what, I need to go to be a teacher back in my hometown. And so that's what I did, and this is my third year doing that.
Hi, I'm Rashonda Flowers Thomas, born and raised here in Gainesville, Texas. I taught here 1 year at Gainesville Middle School many years ago. I have been in education 25 years. I've taught ESL, I've taught English, I've taught, I've taught elementary school, I've taught middle school, I've been a school counselor. I was an administrator for 16 years, 7 as an AP, 9 as an elementary school principal, and now I'm at Central Office in Student Support Services. I'm the Assistant Director in Denton ISD.
I'm Leslie again, and I've been teaching here in Gainesville for 3 years, but total years teaching have been 10. My back.
So Whitney mentioned before that she and I did an equity training in our sort of preschool PD for other teachers. And I by no means am an expert in this. I had gone to a training through the district in Atlanta that talked a lot about equity, and that was where I first learned, equity and quality are not the same, and equity is all about doing what you need to do to get kids to where they need to be. And the reason they're not where they need to be is because of all of these cultural, social, economic, all of these different reasons that they have no control over. And one of those reasons that we did talk about in the training was implicit bias. Mm-hmm. And so I think, in the course of the events of the past several years, and of course the past 100+ years, the conversation has really gotten to a very heated point. And I think that at times language is used a lot in that conversation that kind of shuts the conversation down. Mm-hmm. And to me, I found it really important that we find a way to continue having this difficult conversation about our own worldviews and what our own biases might be without accusing others of things that isn't going to help them do that self-examination that they need to do to be able to move forward. So we did talk a lot about how our implicit biases, and implicit being the key word because it's something that you're not always aware of, but our implicit biases affect us as educators. And kind of my way into that as an educator, I'll just share, like I said, it's my third year teaching, and last year I taught seniors, and I had the pleasure of having my 7th period. I had about 8 African-American students in one class period, which was really amazing, and it was fun, and we got to learn a lot from each other. And I like to do this thing as an English teacher called a Socratic seminar, where we read a text and then we have a discussion about the ideas presented. And I noticed that my students, particularly my African-American students, were having such a high level, critical conversation about these topics. And I was just blown away. I was like, I feel like I'm in college again. You guys are ready. And then it came time for them to write about that same topic. And I was really devastated to see that their writing ability was much lower than their counterparts in the classroom. And that's what really got me upset and curious at the same time about why has this happened? How have my students got to this place where they are seniors and they are clearly capable of this high-level analytical thought, but somehow they did not get the same level of expectation or education to be able to express that thought. So that really spurred my interest in understanding more about how equity exists, or sadly in a large case doesn't exist in education, and what we need to do to get there. And a lot of that is at the administrative level, at administrative changes, but I tried to focus on what can we as educators do. And for me, that was, just because this student has dreadlocks and he's a football player, that doesn't mean you can't expect him to write at the same level that this other student can. Don't write him off. Do you know what I mean? And so that was just a really important conversation I felt like it was to have, because I didn't want to have to see that. It was just so upsetting to see how, and again, I don't think it was through no intentional action by any educator at all, but something broke down in the process for these students. And I wanted to be a part of changing that here in Gainesville. So,
well, implicit bias does exist. I had a student many years ago when I taught 6th grade, and African-American male student, and he could not read. He could not read at all. Excellent athlete, same thing, excellent athlete, but he could not read. And I too was an English teacher, and it just broke my heart. I couldn't believe how a student could get from kindergarten to 6th grade and not know how to read. So I had a conversation with the parent, and father said, I just asked what happened. And the father said, Mrs. Thomas, they just sat him in the room and ignored him. And I couldn't believe it. And I said, well, sir, I can't teach your child how to read in 6th grade, but I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to do my due diligence towards your son. And I'm going to do the best I can to try to catch him up. I tutored him. I worked with him. I never embarrassed him in the classroom because I knew what he could do and what he was capable of doing. I made him feel successful. I made him feel like he could do things, and I asked him questions that I knew he could answer in the classroom, which made him want to work for me. I taught him how to match things up in the classroom. He really could not read much, but when you could do matching. So I asked him questions in the classroom that I knew he would be successful at. Therefore, he wanted to work and he wanted to do, and he came out of his shell. And so he knew, he would start raising his hand, and he just came out, because prior to that, he was quiet. He was completely quiet in the classroom. He never talked. He never did anything because you would overlook him. It was like he was never there. But I can see how students can sit in a classroom and never be seen. Never be seen. On the opposite end, they misbehave. As an administrator, that's on the teacher end. As an administrator, they misbehave to get out of the classroom because they can't do the work. That's the avoidance piece. I noticed that many children misbehave during math time. A lot of African Americans, especially boys, don't like math. They always misbehave. If you chart your data, you can see when a lot of the children are misbehaving during certain times of the day, specific times of the day, and it's an avoidance issue to get out of the classroom because typically they can't do the work.
And the saddest thing about that is then that just reiterates that identity that the teacher or the adults or the community or whoever it is has in mind about this group of students. And then that creates even more blindness to what the problem is. Absolutely.
But a lot of people don't take the time to do that research. A lot of, it's sad, but a lot of teachers and educators don't take the time. And we sometimes as educators just look at it as they're just bad, or they just
don't want
act up, they don't want to work, and you fall into it because you have 20 kids in the classroom and you don't have time to look at that. But I do say, if you are listening to the podcast and you are an educator, step back and be reflective when you have those types of students, when you have students, no matter what color they are, no matter who they are, Hispanic, Caucasian, African American, GT students, no matter who they are. and try to find out why. Because typically there is a reason why
Absolutely.
they're going to the office all the time or
Yes.
whatever it is. And we sometimes do use our own opinions
Mhm.
and the things that we believe and bring that into the educational setting and into the classroom.
Mhm.
Because what you think and what you believe and what you value does come into the classroom.
Absolutely. And I want to pick up on that point that you mentioned, and since this is also specifically about educators, is because, we're one of those professions. I guess I really realized it this year. We're sort of seen by martyrs, like as martyrs by the like how much we sacrifice, how much we try to do with so little, and exactly like you're saying, like, I can totally see how our African American students, now our EL students, our English learners, are literally just getting ignored, and that can happen really easily in a classroom with 25, 26, 27. The numbers continue to get higher and the class sizes. But I feel like, for me at least, and this has kind of been a longer process of awakening, but with this year particularly being COVID, I was scared to go back to school at first, but now that we're back, I feel so thankful every day that I get to be there, because of all the things that we are kind of required to do and asked to do. We have to prioritize what is actually important, and that kind of reflection that you're talking about, and being able to intervene and see those students who haven't been seen and try to bring them into the classroom. And y'all had talked also about incorporating representation in your materials, and I mean, that's a huge part of it. But if I couldn't do XYZ this one day, please let that be the one thing that I did, because we're always going to have things that fall off our plate. But we have to prioritize what is actually important for us. And I feel like this work, that seeing and that bringing in and saying, I see how smart you are, and I can also see why you haven't been able to get that out, and I'm going to try to help you. It's like, yes, if you're in 6th grade, I can't make you read this novel. I can't get you to reading a novel, but I can get you to feel where you feel confident, where you feel like you're growing. And I think that's the most important thing we can do. Absolutely.
And finding out the why, finding out the why of that students, because as teachers, they're always telling us, what's your why? Think of your why, and really think of your why, because maybe this is not the profession for you.
Right.
Because I feel like,
Depending on what your why is.
we label students before they even come to us. We just label students before they're even in our classroom. So if we've already labeled them, our expectation has already a specific point.
Well, and that's an interesting point too. And you mentioned with the GT students. So one of the when I was looking into this equity research, one thing that some, nonprofits recommend is doing away with tracking early on. And I think that can be quite controversial, but that's the idea of like, don't code this kid as GT, because the way kids are coded in elementary school, 100% affects the rest of their future. They're coded at risk. They're coded, some kids I still have coded as ESL, and they're, reading on like an 11th grade level, and, and that can affect how a teacher's expectations of what they might be able to see them doing, and we know for a fact that GT testing does not catch, especially students in communities of color. As well as, of course, now that I dealt with seniors last year and I taught a college prep class before that, the ACT and SAT tests also are not equitable in the way that they assess students' readiness for college. So there's a lot of fundamental changes that have to happen more at an administrative decision-making level. And they are a little bit more dramatic because they kick the status quo a little bit. But I would love for that to be a conversation that we could have here, in GSD. And again, I've just done preliminary research on all of this. It's still very much a learning process for me, but, what is it going to take to get kids in a position where they don't have all these labels that we're giving them on top of the labels that society is already giving them? Do you know what I mean? And really examining the helpfulness of those labels, because GT is intended to be helpful and give kids a path. But if we find that we're not catching, or so many students are being left out of that, then is that really an equitable system? I think these are all really interesting questions to have. And of course, we can't change that. It's a state level thing. I get that, but I feel like that's an important part of the conversation too. So
True.
well, that's so.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is the expectations, right? Like the expectations part of it. That I know in our presentation we did, we found that it was I can't remember his name, but he was a professor at Harvard, I believe, that had done a study. Like he had gone to a group of teachers and with data about their students, and I don't remember if if it was real data or not, whatever it was. He went to them. I guess it was real. He gave the students an IQ test, and he told these teachers, all right, this group of kids, this kid, he scored this. He's probably only going to end up here. This kid scored this. He'll be, and this kid. And I mean, if it wasn't almost like carbon copy of what, or, the trajectory of where those students ended up, like the findings of the study were basically that, like, whether you set your expectations high or low or whatever, like the teacher's expectations that we have and that we put onto a student is like one of, if not the most important thing as far as, and it's I can't remember the exact words. I just saw the quote a minute ago, but it basically like will determine where that kid ends up for the most part. And so that to me, that really puts it on us that it's, like the expectations, like one of the biggest things we can do is have high expectations of students. And yes, I know that accommodations and things are going to be necessary, because we have a diverse group of learners that learn different ways, but we still need to have, high expectations across the board and not just be like, oh, well, this kid, he comes from a rough background, or this kid, whatever, and so he's not able to do the work or whatever, we can be empathetic, but also still, expect them to be able to achieve things.
And my sister in the previous one talked about that. The campus I led was in was 88% economic disadvantage. So it was school-wide title campus. So high needs, very high needs camp is the highest in Denton ISD, period. Of all the high schools, middle schools, all of them. I had every sub-pop that there was. When you look at testing, every single one. We never were low performing. We were on the upward trajectory every year, but very difficult work, very hard, very stressful, very difficult work. But we made great gains. One thing that I always told our staff, you keep the expectations high. You keep them high, and they'll rise to them. If you keep them low, they'll be low. You keep them high. And having been one of those students myself, you, like she said, you can be empathetic, but you cannot fall into excuses. And because, I mean, there are some children with real issues and real problems and real situations. But that's why we have communities and schools, and we have resources, and we have other things. And so you remove the roadblocks, you help to remove the barriers, but you still come to school to learn. You still come to school for this thing. And I had some students one time that told me, Miss Thomas, we have real problems. And I said, well, tell me about your real problems. And so they did. And I just told them, I said, well, look, you can either choose this path or you can choose this path. You could be the made-for-television movie. You have to choose to overcome, or you can choose to live in your situation. So which path do you want to choose?
That's right.
And education is the way.
That's the way out.
So you come to school to learn, and we're here to help you. But I'm not going to sit here and say, it's your medicine. That's just an excuse. You make the choices that you make. So as an educator and a person in the classroom, you can be empathetic.
Absolutely.
But you can't fall into, Lord, I feel so sorry for him. Well, I feel sorry for him too. But if I told you my life story, I had real situations too, but you can overcome that.
Absolutely.
Keep the expectations high.
Yes.
Keep the expectations high. Oh, his parent won't read to him. Well, how can we fix that? See if he can stay after school and read to you.
Right.
So it's a constant problem solving.
Yes.
It's a constant thing that we had to do in that type of environment. I had 50 kids walking across the street every day to the MLK Center. 50 children going across the street. So what do we need to do? Call the parents of those 50 and see if 30 of them need to stay, can we keep those 30? It was just a constant problem solving. It was just a constant. We had 9 buses coming to our school, so we couldn't keep a lot of the children after school. So maybe we had to pull them during a little bit of recess. We had to build in intervention times. We had to just constantly figure out ways that we can get in what we need to get in because they weren't going to get it after school. We had food pantry. We had clothing pantry. We brought in whatever we could, mentoring. We brought the mentors to them. And like they said, seeing people that look like them. We brought in people that looks like them. We brought in mentors. If my sons went to the barber shop, I asked their barbers, can you come and speak to the children at the school?
Nice.
Not everybody's goal is to go to college. They may just want to be a barber.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you come and talk to them and tell them, the 5th graders, what you need to be a barber?
Yes.
I did, and I tried every single thing I could.
Yes.
Every single thing I could to engage the children.
That's such a whole child perspective, because that's the thing is, we as educators, it's more than just, the 3 R's. It's more than just, it's that whole child perspective. And I think also something that that you touched upon that also is kind of a reminder for me is it's like it can be really easy to get overwhelmed by all the change that's out there that needs to be made and that you could make, but you got to focus on what you can do, right? It's like, let's say you could only pull those 30 students to do the after school, but then that was worth it, because I think that that's something that I struggle with as an educator at this moment in history. It's very hard not to get overwhelmed and depressed and dejected, especially when your third conference period that week is taken away for a meeting, and you have, which I'm about to have 242 essays to grade in a week, so it can get really overwhelming, and it can make you question what is all this on, why am I doing all of this? And that's why I feel like it's so important to focus on the small wins, on the things that you can do. There's so much as educators and as people in this world right now that we cannot control. So I just have to constantly remind myself to focus on the small wins, the good things, the things that I can control, and to be creative and to think about that whole child, and what, okay, maybe we can't provide this, but what resources there to provide that for this student?
Because we were talking about equity.
Yes.
And but when you have an 88% economic disadvantage and the only campus close to you is like 82%, that's really not equitable.
Right.
I mean, it's not.
Yeah. No, you're right.
It's not equitable.
Not at all.
So you become creative.
Yes, you do.
If you want to make gains,
yeah,
you become creative.
Yeah.
And so you can either, like I said, wallow in it.
Yes.
Or you become creative because you get some more resources from the state because you get your title money.
Sure, right.
But other than that, you're expected to perform at the same levels as everybody else. You get no passes, you get nothing.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you have these students or these students.
Right.
You could be in a school with 5% economic disadvantage or 88%.
Right.
It's not equitable.
Not at all, right.
But the standards are the same.
That's right. I think that's the important thing. Absolutely. The expectations and the standards.
That's why you have to keep the expectation high and you become creative.
Yeah. I love that.
So as educators, you say, what do you do? You have to become creative. You have to, it's hard. It is. It's hard. It's difficult. It's stressful. Like I said, I've been away from the campus a year, and this is starting my second year, and I thrived on stress. I didn't know what it felt like not to be stressed. I didn't. I really didn't. I worked morning, noon, and night.
Yeah.
And but I loved every day of it.
Right.
Because I made a difference.
Right.
When I look back at the work that I did at that campus, I made a difference. Absolutely. I love the children. I made a difference. And what you all are doing in the classroom during COVID, you're making a huge difference for those children. A huge difference. With everything that's going on, the Black Lives Matter, the times that we live in, it's a lot going on. Things are not equitable out there.
And it's so hard also. Something that I think y'all had started off with made me think about a situation I've just had in one of my classes is, with the face masks. We've got kids walking around with Black Lives Matter face masks. Yes, they are. And we've got kids walking around with Trump 2020 face masks. And you've got both those kids in the same class. And it's.
I know, my son tells me about it.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and I visit
schools. I see them all the time.
I had one student who, was on the pro-Trump side and got threats and didn't feel comfortable coming to school, and that broke my heart. But that broke my heart because, for me, school should be an apolitical place. However, I believe it should be a safe environment where all kids feel free to express themselves and their values. So, what do we do with that? That's kind of been my current challenge. So I had a kid come in. He had been virtual and just came back. He was wearing a Trump mask, and I was pairing everybody up, and he was the last one to come in. And then I had a Hispanic boy over on this other side, and I, could have and should have paired them up to work, but I really had to think to myself, and I had to think, how can I make both of these children feel safe and feel able to work in the best? And if one student is wearing a mask that has a message on it that makes that other student's very identity and livelihood feel threatened, I can't force a conversation there. But I can continue to have a loving and open and empathetic classroom where I make it clear what my values are as a teacher. And my values as a teacher are, in this classroom, we are all the same. We treat each other equally. We aren't going to all believe the same things, but that doesn't mean we can't be kind to each other. You can leave all that other talk outside. But we have to be able to move forward in our work in a way that respects everybody. And that has been really just very difficult when you don't feel like I can provide a safe environment for everybody to feel comfortable. But I think that makes it even more important to model the values of kindness. And and empathy, and high expectations. I expect, and when the little whatever comments that happen, we don't have that talk in this class. I don't care which side of it you're coming from. We leave all that outside because this is a safe place for everybody. And I just wish that we could extend that outside the classroom, but the classroom is the only thing I have somewhat control over.
It's hard because we talked about love language. I know we talked about Israel with Mr. Garcia about love language and how sometimes we just we're so upset about something that was being said, and we were like, I can't believe this person said this. I have to, but people are more receptive when we are able to explain a certain way. It's hard because now that you said this, how do I feel as an adult when I see that? I immediately pull back. Right. To be very honest. Sure. If I see that, I pull back. And it's upsetting to me. And I'm seeing educators, and I pull back. So it's a good question to ask, because if that makes an adult woman teacher step back and walk the other direction, how do I bring it in the classroom? And I see that's hard because I work with, the younger kids.
Littles, yeah.
And so, that's, now that you mentioned this, like, wow, how we lead by example.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
That's all you can do. And but how can I lead by example if I am, if I feel this way? So that's a good question, and it made me think, made me realize of my own the things that I am doing in my outside of work.
I think we have to think of it as being like a gardener. I was doing something the other day, and I got really frustrated. A senior teacher who's kind of been a mentor to me, he came by and he said, I saw you were getting upset about that. He said, don't worry about that. You can't change the world overnight. He said, you just got to throw the seed out there. And that really has stuck with me, is it's like, what are we planting? What are we trying? What are we nourishing? What are we giving water to? Because it's just as important what you challenge as what you don't give oxygen to also. That's something just as a behavioral thing as well. But, you got to be intentional about where you water in the classroom, because there isn't enough water for everything. Sadly.
That's true.
So where do we water?
Well, one of the things that, when we did the equity class that we had addressed was, like, we had each person in there, what do? We had them write down labels that people had put on us. Like,
on them.
So, or labels that apply to me. Like, so I'm a mother, I was a single mother, I'm a Christian, I'm a teacher, whatever, like all labels that, whatever. And then we had them write down all the things that maybe people have said about them, like things that, names I've been called in my 30.
That go with those labels.
Or things that go with those labels. Yeah. So if I'm a Christian, what are some things that people say about Christians? Or what are some assumptions or things that people said about being a single mom or whatever it is? And then we had, them kind of check off, like, okay, which one of these actually apply to you? But then after we did all that, we were like, all right, now it's going to be a little uncomfortable. You don't have to say, speak out loud, but why don't, we're going to write down some things, privately. We're not going to dig through the trash and read what you wrote down, but some things that you have, like, felt towards people, or things that you like, if I'm driving down the street and I see somebody walking, and based off of that person's appearance, what are some things that I might immediately think, like, oh, that person needs to get a job, or what, whatever it might be that we might think. And I think, what a lot of it, we don't have a lot of control and power, and, we're not really pulling the puppet strings of, like, all the things going on in our community right now. But what we absolutely have control over is recognizing and, like, just acknowledging that we all have these, like, biases, these inherent biases, and that, I don't know, I think sometimes we hear the word bias and we're like, oh, that's bad. So I don't, if I say you're biased, it means, like, you're a bad person. And it's not, not necessarily the case. It's like, we all have them, like, and it's just recognizing them and then being aware and, like, acknowledging, being like, oh, like, since we've done that class, I catch myself now. Like, I'll see someone, I'm like, oh, that, and I'm like, no, like, that person's just a jerk. It has nothing to do with the fact that, in my mind, I might think it's nothing to do with the fact that they're whatever, A, B, or C. They're just an inconsiderate jerk, like,
anybody can be that.
Or whatever it is, or this person, wow, they're really smart for coming from this, whatever, no, they're just smart. They're just an intelligent person that works really hard or whatever. So, like, we have, one thing that we really stressed in that class was just like, all right, what we want you to take away from this is examine your biases, like, be aware of them, and make sure that that's not something, the glasses that you're viewing your students as, or through, that we just need to be really intentional that, and constantly, it's like I said, my worldview is constantly growing and evolving or whatever. And so just being aware of these things, and I don't know, I feel like that's really important for us to, we want to change, we want to educate and do these things, but if we're not making sure that, that there's, again, like, that we're not viewing everything through these biases that we have. Yeah. We just need to be very, I guess, intentional on that.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. Because the first way to change is through awareness. You have to first admit. Yes. And see that you have a problem. Yes. Like an alcoholic. Right. Be aware that you have a problem, and then you can change it. That's right. So as long as you're aware, then you can be reflective. That's right. Yeah. That, yes, instead of saying, oh, no, I don't have any bias. Yeah, We all do. We all do to some
And
extent.
it's okay. It's normal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's
It's a human
normal
brain.
as long as you're aware of it
Exactly.
and acknowledge it. Then you say, yes, I do, and I may have them. So I'm willing to change. I'm willing to educate myself. I'm willing to look at and cater the environment in the classroom, and maybe there is something that I may be doing wrong. There maybe is something that I'm bringing into the classroom. I've worked with, like I said, many teachers over the years, and I have had those that are willing to be aware and are willing to sit with children of color and have lunch with them and try to get to know them and say, Mrs. Thomas, I want to connect with that student. And then I've had those that said, no, I'm not doing anything. It's him. It's not me.
Right.
It's him. It's that student. It's not me. And that's just how it is.
As an educator, I mean, as an administrator, right? You know, it's like
it's very difficult. It's very difficult because if the person's not aware they're doing something, then it's very difficult. It's very difficult because when a student only has an issue with that one person,
I think we see that a lot.
Then
it's like a personality conflict between the student and this teacher, or not personality, but
that person cannot see it.
Exactly.
Yeah, agreed.
Then it's something, and you just keep pointing out it must be something with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me point out some things to you. And I've even gone so far as to maybe record the lesson and what do you see, and have the person interpret to me, what do you see? And sometimes they see and sometimes they don't. And when they completely do not see it, I can't continue to harm a child. So, and that's when it gets to that level, I have to move the child to a better environment. And I had to be honest and say, I have to move this student to an environment because that is better for this student, and one in which they can learn. Children can't learn from people they don't like.
That's true.
Or for people who don't like them, you know. I mean, you can, if there's, we all have students that there's a spectrum on what, you know, whether we like, but the student should never know that you don't like them.
True.
You know, and if a kid knows you don't like them, like, you're not going to get anything from them, and you shouldn't. Like,
you know, and I tell some of my students, because, you know, I try to humanize, you know, teachers as much as possible, because here's the thing, it's like, when I talk about bias, you know, it can happen where there will be a kid who becomes that kid that gets looked for everything that goes wrong.
True.
You know what I mean? And so, and each teacher has their own. It might be this kid in one teacher's class and this kid in another. It can be an administrator calling on the same kid for the holes in the jeans or the not wearing the mask. It's like, because I have those kids, like, why, when I'm walking with 4 other people around me, why am I the one that always gets called out for this? And I try to explain, I'm like, you know what? It's something weird in the human brain, but sometimes, and I notice it in myself too, where I'll just be calling or almost like picking on, like, you know, several kids are off task. I call out that one student each time.
Always that one.
Yes, and you know, and it's like, again, that awareness. I do notice it in myself, and I'm like, okay, this is what's starting to happen. I've got to adjust this. And the other thing that I try to do that I would love to recommend to educators to do more of is to apologize to students.
Exactly.
You know, when you are doing something that's wrong, you know, I remember I had a class last year and several kids, and I just got one of them I blew up at, you know, and it got escalated. And she wasn't actually the one that was really even the problem, but I guess she was the one that I felt safe calling out. And I had a good rapport going with her. And, you know, I pulled her aside the next day and I said, hey, you don't need to say anything back to me. I'm not looking for an apology. I need to apologize to you because it got heated yesterday. I lost my cool and I unloaded on you, and that wasn't fair. And so I'm apologizing to you. I'm sorry. And of course, you never had an issue with that kid again because it goes so far.
Regardless the age, too.
Exactly. It goes so far when an adult apologizes.
Yes.
And then also it models that behavior of when you do something wrong, you first got to know it and then own up to it. You know, that's so so important. And so that's another, getting to that reflection piece.
Yes.
It's just so
But
important.
the apologizing, that's regardless the age.
Yes.
I need to apologize because what I did was absolutely wrong, and talk
Yeah.
about it.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Why are you apologizing to the other students?
Yeah.
Well, this is what happened.
Yeah.
Miss, the teacher told the student that he stole a pencil, and it was his own pencil.
Yeah.
Was that okay?
Yes.
And everybody's analyzing. No,
Right.
because the teacher is not always
Right.
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 And kind of like teach the
Right.
formula
Mhm.
for a real apology,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Oh yes.
no matter how little they are, it's so hard to apologize. And I'm in PE, so a lot of time it's a physical thing, like, oh, this one hit me, or this one, whatever.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, let's get together, let's say sorry. And they're like, sorry.
Yeah.
And I'm
Sorry.
like, no, that's not an apology. Look in his
No.
eyes, say,
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I kicked you in the knee. And they're like, they don't want to say it because it's hard. And it's like, no, it's
Exactly.
okay. Like, we're all going to be better after this. Like, just
And that
teach
takes
that.
me to, which we didn't even get to this in our training, but I would love to do, and also I haven't researched this enough, but the restorative justice practice, because that's what that is. That's
Right.
what that
Yes, it is
apologizing
restorative
is.
practicing.
And that's also a place I would love to see all of us move more towards,
Like
instead
versus
of the
like the
timing
policing
out, like
type,
sort of the punitive, it's like, how can we, because, the school to prison pipeline is a real thing, and these practices
really is.
start now. And
Mhm.
so, what you guys are doing naturally, and, that has to become more of the model and the practice that we use in the school, is how can we, and again, it's a newer thing, a lot of people don't, it's not the traditional way it's been done, for hundreds and hundreds of years in education, but, I'm doing the whipping thing because that's really where it comes from. The whip may be gone, but it's still that model of, punishment. Rather than like giving that child an opportunity to kind of express themselves and like what was happening in that moment and make it right and move forward. I would, that's another kind of learning. I would love to learn more about that still myself. And I'd love to see our educational system at large.
In our schools in Denton, we use restorative practices.
Oh, that's great. That's
It's
really
an excellent program, restorative practices.
Give me a PDF. I want to understand as much as I can about
it was
that.
kind of briefly touched earlier. Something made me think of this, but I know there's a teacher at Edison that I had spoken with who was great, like love her, and she had talked about how she was telling me which kids were in her class. This kid, and I remember, trying to remember from last year, and she's like, yeah, I had been warned about this kid or warned about this kid, and I remember I had a professor. She was a assistant superintendent at Aubrey back in TW, and loved her, and she said, like, hey, like, try to resist when you get the file, or don't look, like, wait until you meet that kid, or don't let the teacher from last year tell you, like, oh my gosh, you're gonna really have a hard time with this kid, or this kid always does this. She's like, meet them. And then anyways, this teacher from Edison was telling me, like, like, these kids are great. Like, I don't know why, why I was warned about this, or why, this isn't to call anyone out, but she was just like, like, I'm glad that I didn't, kind of go into it and meet these kids with these bias. They weren't even her biases. They were, we don't need to hand over biases and give them to someone else and
to know them
and pass them along,
But that happens more than you know.
Yes.
More than you know.
And I mean, I get why it happens, because, the one hand you want to know
trying
what to expect.
Warn. Yeah.
But I think what my professor at TW had told me is just like, wait, give it a week, get to know the kids, and then if there's an issue, go reflect back on the file. But don't let this kid come in on the first day of school with you already knowing, like, oh my gosh, this kid always does this kid whatever. So
that's received bias. So that's which is a whole nother layer.
Right.
And that's,
we got enough biases on our own without sharing them with everybody else. Being like, hey, here's some more. You get
right.
you get a bias. You get a bias.
Also, get to know them, get to really know the student, or get to know the person. Even as adults, we talked about empathizing with others when we're like, oh, but I have all my own problems, and we've talked about this too. Also, how we define students based on their race, based on the color of their skin, right away, and we said that it's, well, I have problems too, or it's I lost my idea, but usually it's those students, we're looking at them, they're not gonna, again, you're not gonna go that far. They're gonna give you trouble. No, get to know them.
Always.
You know, get to know their why. And also, as adults, you know, why are we, and when we were reading the book, it did talk about how it's harder to empathize when you are, you know, poverty, but also just to bring back about the color of your skin, how that's not one of the problems that prevents you from being able to being, you know, maybe, you know, you have a lot of problems, you know, you have a lot of things, but the color of your skin is not one of them, for example.
It's not what's preventing you from being able to get to learn these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of these kids that we are talking about, you know, we see the students and we see the color of their skin right away. And like you said, restorative justice, restorative practices. My R's in English sometimes. It's like, how can we, you know, go, you know, don't put a label. We talked about, again, judging the judgment, you know, and how it goes from one year to the next.